Hey watercolor students, I wanted to show you a little bit more about stippling because most stippling examples that you'll see online or demos are usually done with like a pencil or a marker, or if you look at the artist Chuck Close, he's known for that. He does all of his images with a fingerprint, thumbprint. Same thing, anytime you do mark making, this is what it is. We want patches, we want dots, we want variety of saturation and texture. I just picked this image. It's a zoomed in. It's supposed to look like chocolate, but it's actually like a specialized soap. You can see that there's a range of value in here. Lights and darks, opportunities for white, and things you could leave white. You could leave anything you want white in here. You don't want to have to fill in everything, but you definitely want to create volume using different brush strokes. And if the image that you choose has neutrals, that's really helpful because you have this orange, beautiful orangey color in here and this pale periwinkle sort of color in here, elements of light. Whatever your subject, you want to make sure you're not inventing anything in there that's not in there. So first thing you want to do is draw this. Let's see if I can get it bigger. There we go. Don't mind this stain from something else. So here's this, and you do just a loose sketch. And from observation over here, I will start rendering with dots and patches what I'm looking at. I'll start with, just for you to see, I wanted to zoom in really close, and I will again in a minute, but I'm going to start in this area here, working from direct observation. First thing you want to do is get your biggest brush. You don't want to confine yourself to like a toothpick for the entire thing. So I'm going to use a very light saturation, and I'm not being obvious with the color. I'm mixing around on my palette. I'm going to explore color while I'm painting. I'm not going to be focused on matching the color exactly, but it'll build up to that color by doing these patchy layers. So let's see what I got here. See, I'm using the flat brush, but I'm going to do it patchy, and I'm going to add, just so you can see, this is very diluted. This is not, in fact, I'm going to make it even more diluted. And I can go side to side. I can go up to the edge, and even though there's no lines in stippling, pointillism, or impressionism, you can still get to the edge by doing that, by placing a flat brush and then pulling it out, changing the saturation as you go. Like you can see over here, there's a little ripple edge. So I'm going to place this while I'm observing where it is. If you move that shadow too far over, it won't look realistic. So it's just like you did on your shifted still life. You have to obey the subject, which is take a look at it. Now, because it's dense here, but it gets lighter here, this is an opportunity to spread out the distances that these marks are from each other. Put it here. So here it's darker, here it spreads out, but if you cover the whole thing with random evenly spread dots, it's going to look really flat and not good. We have to strategically spread out not only the placement, but the saturation. So I'm moving out like this, and this is going to act as one layer as I build upon this stippling. As opposed to using a pencil to do this, you're using watercolor, so you want to make sure you're featuring the medium. And you see how these are running together, but I'm not doing another layer on top until it dries. You can also use a flat brush to get, they look sort of linear, but you're actually spreading it out. Another thing you can do is, as you come forward, make your patches bigger. That helps create volume too. But you can see it's real deliberate. And this is just the first layer, so we're not committing to it. When this dries, we're going to do the next layer, and I might have to do that in a second. video if this doesn't dry. So I wanted you to see up close what is happening here. And then I'll zoom in more when I get to the next layer. But while you're waiting for the first layer to dry, you can start scanning around at the temperatures and things around. Here I have a little bit more warmer. Too dark. But you see I'm using my biggest brush still. This gives me opportunities to go to my smaller brushes later. And the only way to make this thing look realistic is to keep your eye on the subject. Put some big patches back here. And then keeping the saturation light, you can build. If you go too dark too fast and you put your dots in the wrong place, then you have nowhere to go. So I'm just building up one layer here. And I'm taking my time and really starting to look at this subject. You don't want to put dots on that run together too much. If it runs together a little bit on the next layer, that's fine. But it's a lot like the glazing, where if you don't let it dry in between layers, it ends up mushing together and then it doesn't look like stippling. But you can turn the brush in different directions. It's a very subtle thing. I mean, I picked a very neutral sort of a subject, but within the neutral you can see that this is orange and this is purple. It's a shift. It's still mud on the palette, but it's different. So I'm pushing this brush as far as I can before I switch. All over I'm doing this. And I don't want to go too wild because I want to let the white show through all the time. Very deliberate, very conscious. And I don't want to get hung up on one brush. This is a big one for this little thing. So I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to move down into another size flat brush, and gradually I'm going to build up to a round brush. So this one is flat, but it's a little smaller. So I can start, I might continue with this warm part here. But the thing is if you start filling or painting or putting a solid, you're in big trouble because you're no longer doing stippling, and now you're losing the white of the paper. So even though this is dark, I'm leaving it white, and I might decide to keep it white. It's all about the patchiness and placing the values where they are, but also making decisions about where you might not fill them in. This was a little solid. I don't like how that is. So I'm going to patch it out a little. I want to make sure it still looks like patches. And luckily it's still light enough in saturation that it won't be a problem. Now in this area it's pretty flat on here. It's not got this shift of value. So I want to make sure that my marks go in sort of a cross contour direction to show how this moves. Now I've lost my white over here, so this would be an opportunity later to really get in there with a toothpick. Or a pointy brush. Just make sure you're being really deliberate. I'm seeing some blue here. Whoops, it's a little bit too wet still. So with each stroke, look at the white of the paper and don't commit to an edge or a shape other than pulling it back like that, just to keep some organization to it. If you lose the lights where they fall, you lose the volume. See, this is too wet. Something you can do also, which is kind of a good technique because you can keep going, blot, blot, and also the paper towel acts as a patchy mark sometimes. You can even use a toothbrush, you can use all kinds of things. But see how it looks sort of random at this point? It's sort of random warms, random cools and purples. We don't know what it is yet. That's the key. If you build too quickly, it means you're too attached to what you're seeing. This is what I'm aiming for in terms of the dots and the volume and the placement and spreading them out, the patches. But this is my underpainting. And the trick is to start with your biggest brush and start narrowing it down. Sometimes in the negative space we use real patchy, diluted flat brush like that. But this one is, there's not a lot of negative space in this one. I'm still rushing it. I should wait a little more. But I just wanted to get at least part of it dry so I can show you the next layer. But just want to see how deliberate it is. I'm going to start building value a little more. But if you went to this value right off the bat, you wouldn't have this opportunity for these layers. And you really got to scan your picture and see where the opportunities are. That was too dark. If you do blot, don't go back and forth. As you know, you just got to press down. So I might get a few backgrounds. I might get a little wet and wet. It's okay. Stippling doesn't mean complete control. It means patchy marks and dots with white showing through, so that the space in between is as important as these marks. But I'm really taking a look. I'm not just, randomly making dots. This has to be done through direct observation. But instead of doing a drawing and a grid and all that, it's just that loose line drawing, and then we're going to basically draw with the paint. You can see it's dark here, right in here. Sorry for the shadow. Hold on a minute, let me turn this light off and see if that helps. It might be too dark now, but all right. You can kind of see. I don't know, I think it's worse. So this area here, behind this chunky rectangle shape, is dark and purpley, but instead of painting it solid like you would normally, I'm going to paint patches. I'll put it here. I'm going to put blue and purple and really use all my neutrals. The picture that you pick, you want to pick it to be a combination of brightness and neutrals. But so instead of painting the solid, I'm painting areas, and I'm building upon the layer that I just made. You can see the dark right there. So instead of filling this, I put a patch and a patch. And here I have a little edge. I can do like almost a linear mark with the side of the flat brush. You can use a flat brush to make linear marks. But in this case, we're going to graduate to the round brush. Now here's an opportunity to use patchy marks here to give the illusion of volume as it moves this way. If you have to connect a line, do it with patches. It just doesn't look so good when people try to make a line. It's almost better to just use these patchy marks. So it's dried enough now that I want you to see up close the deal. See how it's so gradually starting to look like that? Just so gradually. It's like that and that. It's like a subtle buildup of volume. And then once this dries, you now have an opportunity to move even smaller in brush and in shape of brush. Since we know round brushes and Q-tips and toothpicks are best for this, I'm going to move into a round. Now this round brush is not a small round brush. which is good because I can move into a smaller one as I go. Now is when I'm going to start exaggerating my hues a little bit. If I feel like it's warm, you can take some license. In this area, a lot of people wouldn't notice, but this is orange. It's a subtle orange, but it's warm, cool and warm. So this is an opportunity for me to go crazy with my oranges. But because it's stippling, it's going to be so soft that it'll end up looking like that color because I'm going to do it very strategically. I'm going to do this edge right here so you can see orange. I'm going to go closer. I want you to see the technique. Actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this so you can really see what I'm saying. Okay, you can see that I've already built some patchy marks up to this edge. I'm going to play with orange here and here. So I'm not being so much committed to the color that it is. If I use this color for everything, it would be very flat. So it's more like you're exploring the color more aggressively, but it's more about the technique. That's too dark. Because compared to this value is much darker than this. All right, let me just focus. I made this a little less orange. I thought it was a little too orange, but you can play with the orange. So I have this dark value, but within it, I'm going to start experimenting with a little bit of color just to give it some life. It doesn't mean I'm leaving the image, but this is the technique. It's basically glazing like we did in the last project, where before the still life, where we did layers of dry paint on top of other dry paint. So this is incorporating that. But it's very, you can see it's very strategic and deliberate. And this is still just another layer. I can only work on one area at a time with stippling, because stippling takes weeks. This is just maybe the second size up from where you're going to go. It's a very thoughtful sort of a process. I'm going to put some red over here. And you might pick up a brush and go, you know, I don't like this one. I don't know how I feel about this one. But there's a light edge. You can see it here. It's like a very light, delicate, looks almost like torn paper. So I don't want to use that up. I want to build up to it. And you can use a brush in different directions to create different shapes of patch. And turn your brush a lot. Turn your body, turn your brush. Don't get sucked into one position where you're just like doing this tedious thing, because then it just gets boring. And we don't want a boring stippling project. I still think I'm getting not enough saturation. I mean, too much saturation. It's better, because this part's a lot lighter. And I'm not feeling this brush. I'm going to go to a pointier one. And they can get super pointy. Let's see, here's a good one. See, this one's a lot pointier. So I'm going to start getting some detail. Just because, I can't show you this kind of a project in one sitting for sure. So after you have this cool stuff, then you start actually putting in those spots. If they run together, it's probably a good idea to let them dry, but little bits are okay. I'm going to do one a little more dry over here. Let me move this over so you can see how it should be when it's really dry. Right here, I'll move it over now. Okay. This is what you want. Let's stand up so you can see in the light better. That's better. Okay, look at these dots. And remember, I'm zoomed in, so they're even tinier than what they look. As you start to build, you'll use less water and more paint. But only at the end. If you start out with a lot of paint, it might be interesting when you turn it in. It'll be like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's stippling. But it'll end up looking like a pencil stippling, which means all dots. Like if it's all like this, the entire picture that you've done this, the whole picture is this. It'll look groovy because you'll have volume as you spread things out. You know, like if you did a sphere like this and you compressed your dots around, eventually it would look three-dimensional based on where you put those dots. Problem people have is then they fill around it. You can't fill. So if you wanted to fill around a sphere, you'd have to use patches. And you could change the intensity and use the side of a flat brush to get more of an edge, but it's still got to be patchy in the back. You can't like suddenly define it somewhere. You patch it out, and you can get to the edge and go like that to show. You can use that dry brush too. But then you end up with you're starting to build volume in here. But if you do it all with those kind of Q-tip dots, it's really boring. This is what we want, a variety. This is what you're looking for. The background will be real patchy and loose. The goal is to have nothing really look like a line. You can build up to an edge like this, but with the patches. So I wanted to show you that dry brush because we talked about that in class. When you do dry brush, you got to use a pretty good amount of paint. You don't want a whole bunch of water. And get a scratch paper, and at first it's going to be watery. And then the next one will be a little less. And so what's happening is the brush is starting to, the water is getting absorbed by the paper. And then it gets less. And then it gets less, and then it gets less, and you're barely touching down. You keep doing this over and over, and this is actually great for negative space. This is great technique for big areas of negative space. Now look what's happening. Now we're starting to finally have dry brush. But see how long it took to get there. So if you use some kind of dry brush like this in your background, or on something that has big patchy marks, this is a great way to do it. So this is what you end up with for dry brush. And it's like, it looks like hatching or cross hatching. But the key here is move your brush in different directions. Move your body in different directions. Use a variety of brushes. And although you're matching the temperature value and all those things that you see on there, you're building layers of activity by exaggerating a little bit of the color. So even when I build layers like this is considered stippling because I'm patching. I'm patching in, I'm not covering the white. So that's the key, is these techniques and these layers of saturation building up to the tiny dots, so that by the time you get to those, you have grounds for this tiny, tiny dot. And if you hold it at a point or use a Q-tip, you'll get this very nice. You don't want to rush it. People go really fast. If you rush it, it's going to be sort of impressionistic, but it won't have the technique. If you keep going with these dots all the way down, you have no volume. So you have to make sure you cluster your dots close together where it's dark in the picture. And then as you move away, spread them out as you come forward. So that's how you create the volume, and that's how things start to look like what they are, is building those layers. But look at, I mean, just the complexity of it. Make watercolor shine in this. This isn't pencil. This is a transparent medium. So take your time, be deliberate. If it doesn't work, start over. But this is fun, and I'm slowly building up to this thing, but anyway, that's the basic thing you're looking for.